Okay, everyone, welcome to the first Scale Climate Action meetup in Canggu. This is day 2 of a series of events we're kicking off in Bali with the hope that we're going to continue to do these and engage with folks and topics that you guys are interested in. My name is Jennifer. I'm a fellow remote worker nomad. I've been living this life for about 3.5, 4 years, and I recently created a base in Bali. And I want to thank everyone for coming and being interested and engaged today. And I also want to thank the Tropical Nomad crew for just doing an amazing job of bringing the community together and putting some really interesting and compelling topics on the menu for our community. I think we're at a really interesting and incredible time in the world, especially post-COVID, where a lot of us are really redefining and thinking about our work, our life, where we live, our purpose, what's important to us, and also the communities that we live in. And understanding, like, okay, maybe I don't live in the place that I used to live in, but how can I contribute, and what does my purpose and contribution look like in the community that I'm living in today in Bali, or maybe somewhere else in the future? And a bunch of us that have come from the tech world and from the startup land have been thinking about our next big global challenge, the challenge of climate change. And so, we've been thinking about, is there something that we can bring from this experience we have in the tech and the startup world and bring that into the challenge of the momentous challenge that we have in climate now these days? So hence, we spun up a little initiative, which we're calling Scale Climate Action, to kind of test this theory out and to engage with you guys and with others in the Bali community and hopefully more broadly to have these conversations and to question ourselves and say, is there something else I can be doing? Can I step up with the skills and experience I have from the places I'm coming from to do exactly that, to live in this new world and find purpose and a way to contribute. So, this is a pretty confronting and I think super interesting statement. Every job is a climate job. I don't know about you guys, I hadn't really thought about that personally, but if you realize now, everything you do, whether you have a job in a company, you're a founder, you've got a hustle or a couple of hustles, everything that we do is either climate positive or climate negative. There's not too many jobs that you can have that are totally neutral. And I don't know many people that want to be neutral in this world. So with that in mind, I guess our challenge to you guys is to consider your own climate superpower. Some folks might already be along in that journey and be already engaged. And some people, this might be the first time anyone's ever asked you that question. But we're really encouraging folks to think about this, whether you're an engineer, a creative, a marketer, a finance person. I think we all have something to bring. This is the biggest challenge we have globally, and we need everybody to think about their skills and experience and what they can do in this space. So what is Scale Climate Action? We're a community of like-minded individuals. We have a strong bias towards solution-based action. So we don't want to sit around and talk about stuff. We actually want to look at the solutions, focus more people on those solutions and get people moving. And we're not willing to stand by and let this to be somebody else's problem. What can you expect from today's session? So again, around this thesis of, hey, is there something from the tech, from the startup world that we can bring into this space? What we've done is convene a panel of both folks with heavyweight tech experience and also leaders in the sustainability space. Some folks have both, which is pretty amazing, to really challenge us to have this discussion and debate. And I really encourage everyone to lean in and provoke. This is a theory. We don't know the answer to this, but I think it's up to us to debate and discuss this and see what we can learn from each other. And I think Bali is an incredible place with such diversity of experience, skills, nationalities, industries, money. This is an incredible catalyst for change, and I think this community could be bringing new ideas and a lot of energy to this climate change conversation. So the plan is a bit of a panel and discussion where we're going to have a number of speakers. We want you guys to ask questions and be involved. But then we're also going to turn this into a discussion so everybody has a chance to participate and share and support each other and find maybe your own tribe of folks that you might like to work with in the future. And then we're going to have a little happy hour networking session if anyone wants to hang around and get to know each other. Okay, what is our theory of change? In typical startup or tech world fashion, this is our thesis. Let's see how we go. So what we know is that 80% of solutions are already commercially viable and available for climate action and climate change. They just need to be scaled. We need more people, we need more funding, we need more resources, we need more focus in this space. We need to mainstream this thing. This is like still a little niche topic that a lot of us prefer to ignore on our bad days. We need to mainstream this conversation. This is the biggest challenge we collectively have as a globe. No one can opt out of this change. It's happening to us whether we like it or not. How do we bring this into the mainstream and make this a core conversation we have every day? And then finally, our goal is we think we need to get about 1 billion people on board. You know, again, there's a tipping point in this space. We need to get enough people talking about this and doing something about this so that we tip the conversation into action and into actual impact. So our goal, what we're seeing is that there's some fantastic organizations on the ground in Bali, Indonesia, globally, that are doing amazing work. And in typical fashion, a lot of NGOs or organizations don't get the funding or the resources or expertise they need. So we see this gap where we need more people and more money in this space. And we bring this idea of maybe there's something that we can learn from the tech world and from the growth and startup world that can actually help us accelerate and scale some of this change. So that's kind of our theory, our goal that we're going to be testing. And we'd love all of the brains in this room and beyond to help us work out, you know, is there some magic here that we can put some fuel on the fire and get things moving faster? Why Bali? Well, again, Bali, as we said, is an incredible hub and catalyst. We've got some incredible folks from all around the world, especially post-COVID, where there's even more of us moving or living here at least part-time. So how do we do something with that magic? Indonesia, it's actually the 4th largest contributor for greenhouse gas emissions. I didn't realize that until a couple of days ago. It's a huge country, a huge growing economy. There's a lot of opportunity. How do we turn that growth opportunity into something that's also climate positive in the process and work with the ecosystem in Indonesia to do that? And then finally, we want to make sure that these are conversations that are not happening just in Bali and Indonesia, but that are happening in parallel globally. So we seek to inspire other communities and other folks to have these same conversations in their own place. And also we've already got folks, I think, in Australia and India and a few other places already want to have similar types of meetups and events. So how do we inspire more change, especially in the developing world that are often engaged at the end, but they're often the ones that are really experiencing firsthand these impacts more greatly than a lot of other places. Okay, how are we going to do it? Again, a lot of these solutions are already here. We pulled down some reference to the top challenges or the top areas of focus that we need to work on. And what we're going to do is give you guys a chance to spend some time in discussion later around areas that you might be interested in. So again, these are solutions that have been studied. They know that they're the ones that have the highest impact. How do we kind of focus our energies as well in these spaces so we can be laser focused on working on the solutions? Okay, why do we do it? I think it's probably self-explanatory, but we've got a fast closing window, okay? So time to get moving, guys. Like, we need to be urgent and focused and start acting. We haven't made enough progress. We know that the kind of industrial scale complex we've created, which we've benefited from, is also creating massive industrial scale influence, impact, and negative impact on our planet. So we need to have a counterforce that's going to undo some of that and create these changes that we need to see. And then finally, we can't stand still. So as we said, every job is a climate job. There's a role for everybody in this fight, and we just need to work out what it is for each of us. Okay. So what have we done? Yesterday we had an amazing session at Green School. We had about 50 people attending. And that was a great group of people that was super engaged and already kind of looking at their own actions and how they can contribute. So we've got a number of those folks, I think, that came from yesterday that are back in the audience, familiar faces, which is great to see. And again, the goal is to continue having events at Green School and in Ubud to engage that community of Green School parents and beyond that are interested in this space. Today's discussion and panel, and then tomorrow we're just going to do a casual meetup, happy hour for anyone that wants to continue to get involved and chat with other folks and share your ideas. So a bit more of a casual session tomorrow in Canggu again. And then on an ongoing basis, we plan to hold these regularly to support each of the groups that are working, so you can find your tribe and other like-minded people. And then monthly meetups from September onwards in Ubud, and hopefully, if this goes well, something around the Canggu kind of beach area in Bali as well as global locations. Okay, just a quick slide about the team. I'm Jennifer, and we've got Renato who's here, and he's going to be moderating. Some amazing experience from Tencent in Asia, head of product management. We have Rudra, who I've never met yet, but he's already signed up for India. And Steve, who's away. He's Bali-based, a Green School parent, and is currently travelling in the UK. So, small but mighty team. We are looking for more folks. We've just been doing the whole gamut ourselves, like a typical startup, but we'd love some other folks to join us. Come chat if you think you've got something to add. We're super early and young, and we need support and your skill sets. Okay, I'm going to pass it now to my esteemed colleague Renato to introduce our panel and moderate for us. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone, for coming. It's amazing to see a very similar turnout as yesterday. So it seems that a lot of people are interested in joining the climate cause and understanding a little bit more about that. It's not just about learning, but also bringing about your knowledge and experience to the table so that we can together try to answer a couple of questions and move forward in a big way. So for that, to help to inspire everyone, okay, let me walk into the camera. To help inspire everyone with ideas for the discussion that we're going to have later, and also to allow you to ask questions that might be relevant to your reality, to your experiences, or to whatever you're looking to do in the near future, we have an amazing panel that we've been able to put together. Bruce is coming from Gojek, Amazon, and Microsoft. Bruce, please feel free to take your seat. A round of applause for Bruce. Until very recently, Bruce was the Chief Product Officer of Gojek in Indonesia. So probably you guys have heard of Gojek already. If not, I would suggest you take a chat with Bruce later on. And he's bringing a wealth of tech experience into the mix today. So really trying to convey or help us to figure out ways that high-tech growth can help scaling climate action. Then we have Tanguy, co-founder, a round of applause, co-founder of Ubicast in France, which became one of the largest private video streaming companies in Europe, and is also the co-founder of Astungkara Way here in Bali, working with regenerative agriculture and having a very interesting path connecting tech and nature-based solutions, essentially, right? And then to complete the panel, we have Diego. A round of applause. Diego is coming from the textile and furniture industry, working with recycled plastics in textile, and is bringing also a wealth of experience to the panel. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to the panel, and thank you for your time. Thank you for trusting my story, the story that I told you guys, and thinking that there was something to it. And I hope, again, that we all find some answers to the questions that we have, and I hope that this is interesting for everybody. We will do a round of questions to everyone in the panel, and then later open up for the crowd as well. So please think about questions that you might want to ask, right? The first panelist I would like to ask questions, and I will give everybody also a chance to introduce yourselves in the first question, is Tanguy. So Tanguy, you're connecting both worlds, and that's really amazing. When I heard that the first time, I couldn't believe it, right? So can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing with Astungkara Way and how you transitioned from Ubicast, from technology into nature-based solutions? So thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you.
Thank you, Renato. Does the sound okay? Yeah? Okay. So the transition, I think the origin of the transition is a feeling that perhaps a lot of us have today, I guess that's why we're here, is this feeling in the heart that, that there's something that's very meaningful and really important to do, which is to perhaps dedicate our most valuable resource, which is our time, to more meaningful things. And that was the beginning of the transition. I mean, I really, growing up, my dream was to start a tech company. I was grateful to be able to do that very early on, and after a while, I was like, okay, this is great, but it's time to do what I really love. And I've always been very connected to plants, to nature, and so when I had the opportunity to leave my company and to move away, my wife and I came to visit Bali, and we felt such a strong connection to this place. We're like, okay, let's try here, our intention when coming here was to join an organization that was doing good. It was kind of vague, we didn't really know what that meant. And pretty early on, the great luck and honor to meet Tim Vigil, who's in the back there, the co-founder of Astungkara Way. Tim explained to me what he was about to do, to create an organization that was going to be focusing on a program that he had started a little while ago. Maybe we'll go into that a bit later. Very quickly it felt like this is what I'd been looking for. It felt immediately right. And since then, I've been dedicating my time to this. So I'd say it was a very smooth transition. It just started with an intention, but also with kind of the taking the leap and leaving Paris, where I'd been living for 16 years. And just going into the unknown and saying, okay, this is what I want to dedicate my time to, starting from now on. Day one.
Fantastic. I want to jump straight into. How or have you used any of the experiences that you had growing Ubicast to now grow Astungkara Way? Do you think there were any learnings from that time that you have applied or maybe applying in the near future that you can share with everybody else?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to answer the question, but through kind of an example. One of the things that Astungkara Way is doing is that we are working on what is perhaps one of the largest transition programs of rice paddy farmers from chemical farming to not only non-chemical farming but regenerative rice cultivation. So restoring rice paddy ecosystems through the use of different practices, which are basically traditional practices. So we're bringing back the way rice was cultivated, let's say, 30, 50 years ago, before the Green Revolution. The answer to your question is we're doing this thanks to the support from experts who are in Holland, who have like a local expert who's from Java, and funding from the US. And we're able to obtain that funding and that expertise because before doing this, actually, Astungkara Way built a sustainable business model around actually ecotourism. That's the first thing that we developed. We presented this case in a very sort of structured way with sort of like, projections and financial planning. How does this, have benefits for the farmers, for ecosystems? And so I'd say one of the first things that, that comes to mind is what I brought from the startup and from the tech world is realizing the importance of building a solid business model. When we met our funders, they said actually they had selected our project from 13 other projects that were presented to them in Southeast Asia. And they said that they had chosen Astungkara Way because we were the only organization that actually had a business model, we were just about to run our first profitable year, and for them it's super important for this to be the case. They don't want to, to give out a grant, in this case, to an organization that is going to be relying on grants. So I'd say number one is importance of business model. And there are loads of great organizations out there that are having great impacts, that are perhaps lacking a bit in the sense, and maybe that's where some people can help if you're working in business modeling and if you have expertise in this. Some organizations who themselves could benefit from more resilience in their own model, and I think that's what set us apart. That's what allowed us to reach to scale up thanks to this grants. So that's the first thing, and then, there's a number of other things, but maybe I'll stop there. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I think this is really interesting because we have a nature-based solution that is also highly focused on business model and generating revenue and being profitable, and that enables it to actually scale, right? So that's, I think, an interesting lesson to be shared with everyone. Thank you. Appreciate it. Bruce, I think it's your turn now. Can you explain everyone a little bit about your role at Gojek and how you were also able to sponsor some of the sustainability projects that were taking place at Gojek?
Sure, no, thank you, Renato. Very happy to be here. So I'm now ex-Gojek, ex-GoTo, but I moved here 3 years ago. I've been very lucky in my career. I had a habit of just saying yes to things, which took me all over the world. And when Gojek sort of approached me, I saw something. Here was something that actually had a purpose. They had a bigger purpose. Massive company, definitely had a very interesting business model, but they were actually making a difference to ordinary people, providing mass employment for millions of drivers, almost like over 2 million drivers, changing the lives of hundreds of thousands of merchants by giving them a platform and a system that could vastly expand the reach that they had to new customers. So it's making a real difference to these very ordinary people. And for me, that was much more attractive. As if I'm going to do something, I want it to really impact normal people and really help normal people. And Gojek were doing that on an enormous scale. Now, when I came in, it was, as often happens with me, I come into a company when they're at a point of a sort of a pivot. And I think Gojek had realized, we've had enormous growth. We've done an enormous amount of marketing and promotions and a very competitive environment. But we really need to get back to the basics and back to product and back to the customer and to bring back that sense of magic. And again, this is something else that really I love doing. It's a part I love of my job, is just understanding the customers and maybe sometimes helping a company getting to know their customers again, because nothing is static. Things changed, countries change, regions change, and customers' expectations change. And so I won't go into that too much. I want to switch to the environmental side of this. But there was a lot to do and a lot to. So how do you reinvent yourself? So even these big and massive companies at some point start to think, how can we go back to thinking like a startup? How can we go back to sort of getting to know our customer again and sort of reinventing what is it we're doing for people? Are they really happy? Are they enjoying? Do they value what we do for them? And how could we do more for them in their lives? Now, the environmental side of things, I'll actually mention a lady's name. I mean, I really became a sponsor for this, one of the executive sponsors, because chief product officer, maybe to explain a little bit, I mean, it's a whole range of experience here, I know. Chief product officer usually comes along. The CEO is usually the early chief product officer. The CEO is often the person who is really passionate about the customer, going out, speaking to people, figuring out what do we really need to do, validating this is the right thing that we're doing. That at a certain point, a CEO's job becomes overwhelming. It's a lot to do as a CEO. So you need to bring on people to help you. So eventually the CPO sort of becomes, I was a proxy for all the things the CEO used to do. Certainly helping the CEO, but just they didn't have enough time. So as one of the members of the leadership team, I also had the privilege of helping to sponsor certain things. One of the things I definitely sponsored was the move for sustainability. And I'll mention a lady's name, Tana Sullivan. So Tana Sullivan is Gojek's and now GoTo's head of sustainability. Awesome lady. I definitely would try and get her along here at some point as well. And she became a sort of a point of focus to keep everybody accountable And sort of together, the leadership team decided, let's set ourselves a really crazy, aggressive target, which is the sort of thing that Gojek has done. The whole history of the company, they've always set targets. People say, oh, you'll never do that, but they did. So I said, well, let's be carbon neutral by 2030. Now, this is a company that is, it's a massive amount of two-wheelers, four-wheelers, and then even after the merger with Tokopedia on the e-commerce side, Tokopedia, obviously a huge amount of deliveries happening there, so it's very sort of carbon-based. And to say we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030, a really big, hairy, auspicious goal. And so that was quite inspiring. And so one of the things that Tana was sort of coming into the company was, well, I have all these people to influence. How am I going to influence the way that we think about products, the way we build products, the way we think about our whole end-to-end experience? And so I was happy to support her in that, in terms of and help her to encourage all of the leadership team, and then everybody below that to you were saying every job is an environmental job. Tell everybody, explain this is not just Tana's job. This is your job. She's just going to keep us accountable, and she's going to work with you and help inspire you and write. We'll have an annual report publicly to say how we're doing. And so I helped from the product side and the development side by saying, okay, as we look at our themes for the next year and the year after that, there is going to be a strong focus on sustainability. So for things like food, we sort of came out at the end with Tana's help with the 3 zeros. So we need to have zero emissions, zero waste, and zero barriers. So the zero emissions was certainly talking about the bikes and the cars that we use to deliver this service to 60 million plus people around Indonesia, also in Singapore, also in Vietnam. So we decided, well, we have to go all electric. And so we have to go all electric by 2030. So it was a case of then, okay, how do we put in place how do we get things like the pilots going? So we have, 5,000 vehicles one year, 10,000 the next year, in Bali, in Jakarta, gradually expanding out. So how do we get that in motion? So that became part of the transport team's objective, to really enable that. And one of these things just had to be done. So we had to enable that, in addition to all of their other goals, which were quite substantial as well. On the food side, zero waste. How do we ensure that we absolutely minimize and reduce to zero any waste that ends up in landfill? And so a lot of this was around a big move towards what are called cloud kitchens. So kitchens that are built that are just so that you're not sort of, as you're delivering online orders, you're not sort of getting in the way of customers in your actual restaurant. So we provide cloud kitchen spaces. So move to a commitment where all of the waste from all of these cloud kitchens, none of it's going to end up in landfill, and then gradually have that impact the merchants in general. And then a lot of other things, like even with Tokopedia, moving to have 80% of all the packaging is recycled. There's so many areas where every team and every level and every business had to have a very significant sustainability goal, and it was just baking that in. And so you had to have commitment from the top to lead by example. I think to show, well, we're doing this. What are you doing? And I think to give Tana that support, and then she did an amazing job of then being the sort of evangelist across the company. But you just have to support the people that are doing that. And she is the leader, but she needed support. And then the final of the 3 zeros was zero barriers. And this is about people who are disadvantaged economically and socially. How do we make sure that there is no disadvantage there, even when tough things happen, like the pandemic? So we've done this with our drivers and merchants, to help them get through those tough times, especially the four wheels with passengers, which the passengers obviously went down dramatically during COVID, while the food business somewhat sustained itself. We had to support those drivers and think of, how do we ensure that they're okay? How do we ensure the drivers are okay? How do we think about the underbanked population in Indonesia who could have more help and more help in sort of more creative ways? How do we help all of those people and come up with a very ethical and responsible way of providing mini loans so that you will never be stuck anywhere? We will temporarily loan you a small amount of money so you can get home, but we don't allow you to take out huge loans. So it was thinking through all of those 3 zeros and being responsible. Every year there's a sustainability report. How are we doing? And we're moving along despite all of the challenges and everything else that's on the plate and all the reasons that we would have reasons not to do this, just to keep that moving along. So it was really about providing sponsorship. So I sponsored that, and I also sponsored diversity, which was like a huge passion of mine as well, because guess what? You actually need a very diverse team to be able to be innovative in everything, including that. So that was how I ended up there. Now, I've a couple of times in my career, I've had a pivot myself. There was one point when I was doing a lot of fun things, entertainment and video, and then I looked at my sister, who was a nurse, and she was telling me how she just saved somebody's life. And I'm like, okay, well, I helped somebody watch a movie, and it didn't feel quite the same. So I wandered into security, and I was interested in fraud and keeping people safe online, and ended up doing that for 8 years. And that has been actually very helpful to me ever since, because understanding how to keep people safe and avoid fraud is important in any job. Now I come to where I am now. So I've had an amazing time with Gojek and GoTo. Huge merger with Tokopedia. Took the company public. The first company ever actually to give shares to the drivers and merchants as well. We actually thought about everybody in the ecosystem. And so I've got to the point now where, okay, I think I'm ready for another pivot. And I'm also inspired, again, family, looking to some of my nieces and their husbands working in the environment. And I was like, wait, what have I done? I've sponsored some things and I've pushed for things, but I haven't done anything like really, really hands-on and specific to this area. And so for me, I think it's that point where I'm thinking now, I've made the move, I've left, and now what? Now what do I do? So interesting to meet Renato. I've also had met a few people, and it's been pretty inspiring. So I'm really interested to see what can I do, how can I help? As we're thinking about some of these issues together, and how do we scale this, and how do we make a difference? So,
thanks, Bruce. Really appreciate it. I really hope the rest of you guys help me to convince him to join the fight. And just to touch on one thing that Bruce was talking about with Gojek committing to carbon neutral by 2030, we don't have much time, right, Haley? We have about 6 years and 2 days to stop warming at 1.5 degrees. And we're nowhere near that, right? I personally don't think we're going to be able to do that. And this is one of the biggest wake-up calls we have to scale climate action, right? We need to all be thinking about it, all be thinking about whether what I'm doing is positive or negative climate-wise, nature-wise, sustainability-wise, because we don't have much time to revert that, right? So yeah, 2030 seems to make a lot of sense, and let's see where this can take us. So thank you, Bruce. Now over to Diego. So Diego has been working with textiles industry for quite some time, textiles and furniture. He has an interesting work with recycled plastics and creating textiles from recycled plastics. And in my discussion with him, I realized that, my earlier discussion with him about 2-3 weeks ago, I realized how much of our eagerness to have beautiful homes and beautiful furniture and etc. is so unsustainable. And I would love you to talk a little bit about that, explain to everybody, this point that I was very, very surprised about. If you could share some stats on the industry as well and introduce a little bit of the work you've been doing. Thank you.
We need to share one microphone. Yes. All right. Thank you, Renato, and good afternoon to everyone. How we started is from the point that Renato just mentioned, that every time that we think about our homes is, I want to get the best fabric with the best texture and the best sofa. And I think this is kind of the starting point when we don't realize how much impact those industries brings to the planet, to our environment. So back in time, let's say 7 years ago, we started this journey in China, where we realized that actually the textile is the second most polluted industry after the fossil fuels. And I think sometimes people don't get that point yet, how polluted in terms of the processes is this industry. So we were thinking how we can optimize and how we can first optimize the process, and second, how we can create another alternatives for the furniture makers to have less impact. So we entered to the process to understand deeply how a fabric is made, and then we found out that from the plastic waste, we can get the same polymer to make the yarns. So we entered to this journey to find a way how to get the right technology with the right funding and the right processes and everything. But and then we faced another challenges that was, for example, the chemicals. The chemicals to do the dyeing process is absolutely insane. The textile industry is actually the largest consumer in chemicals in the world. So I'm just trying to throw some data here for people to understand when you buy something, even just a cushion, we need to understand what's behind this. So we entered to break down the process to the point that we optimize each of them. We were still a long way to get there. But we started to make the fabrics with the recycled yarn. So we use this polymer from the plastic waste. We use plastic bottles. So the PET gives us the possibility to use this polymer that can replace the PES, which is the polymer that creates the virgin polyester. And I don't want to enter into a technical point here, but it's very, very interesting for someone who wants to know about this. And so the journey started there. We faced a lot of challenges along the way, for sure. Mindset, I think, is one of them. So statistically, 100 billion meters of textiles are produced per year. 100 billion. And 20% every year ends up in the landfill, like it's where it always goes. This percentage, only 20% can be recycled, only 20%. And 60% of all the type of jars that are in the market are made of plastic, nylon, acrylic, polyester. So if you think about it, we are just surrounded by plastic. We are sitting on plastic. We are wearing plastic. So those were the sensitive points for us to start. So how are we going to do it? Okay, we're going to bring as much as plastic we can back to the economy into textile. We are going to do textiles made of recycled plastic waste, and this is what we've been doing for the past years. With a lot of challenges, but we're getting there.
Very good, thank you. So I want to jump straight into the challenges, right? Because I think one of the things that caught my attention was also the fact that you're trying to decarbonize the whole supply chain around textiles and furniture production, and the challenges that you face convincing suppliers to change their practices and et cetera. So can you talk a little bit about those challenges as well? And then Tanguy, I'm going to ask pretty much the same question to you on challenges right after that.
Challenge number one, we had to make sure we had a reliable supply chain. That was the top one. How we are going to make sure that we get all the plastic waste that we need to make sure that we can fulfill the production that we need. So how we did it, it was the biggest challenge, but how we did it was we partnership with waste management companies, local communities, also government. We need their support as well. And we create all this circular path where the collectors will become to be aggregators, so we can track all the process. When we enter from the recycled pellets, which we melted, and then we create the yarn. So the challenge number one was make sure that the supply chain was established, and we can get enough materials to be able to supply our customers. Challenge number two was to be able to be certified internationally. So we are certified by Ecotex, for those who are familiar with textile industry. Ecotex allow us to be, I would not say it's chemical free, but we use certain chemicals that are not harmful for our skin or for our body. And the other certification that we carry is the GRS, which is the Global Recycle Standard, which allow us to tell our customers that we are 100% recycled. There's a lot of information in the market, and everybody says they're recycled, but once you ask them to prove that, there is no information. So, yeah, people like to talk about this a lot. But you have to make sure you tell your customers to believe in your product through those. And this is third-party certifications. It's not in-house like we also do. The third challenge, and they was still the biggest one, one of the other biggest one, is the mindset, how to go to these furniture makers around the world to tell them that there is another way to produce furniture using fabrics made of recycled plastic waste. And believe it or not, price-wise, quality-wise, everything is there. They still say no for their own reasons. So that's also one of the challenges. I think we are paying a lot more attention how to make the approach to these companies, how to let them know that this is the way we should all need to go in order to reduce all the impact that the virgin materials are creating in the planet. And then I have more, but I think that's not enough.
Thank you. So I think one of the ways is for us consumers to actually pressure the industry, not just this industry, but every industry, right? For more sustainable products. Okay, thank you. So, Tanguy, back to you. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced so far with Astungkara Way, and the biggest challenges towards scaling this business model all over the globe, be it with Astungkara Way or any other organization that you guys may partner? What I'm interested in is on scaling the solution that you guys are actually bringing to the table, right? Because what you're doing is beautiful, it's amazing, and ideally all farmers in the world should be working with the same sort of practices that you guys are working on, right? So what kind of challenges do you see scaling that up, and how could we potentially do that?
Okay, maybe I need to get a bit more into the details of what we do, because we actually have two branches of our activity. So you talk about farmers. I'll talk about the other one first. So perhaps what Astungkara Way is most known for is that we created the first walking trail or walking trails across Bali. So we have different lengths of walking trails, but the sort of signature walking trail is actually a coast-to-coast, which starts in Chimagi and goes all the way to the north. And this trail has the particularity of connecting communities who are engaged in regenerative action all along the way. So the first challenge that we had there is, I mean, exactly what you were mentioning, the last one, and what you were saying as well, is sort of the mentality, consumer behavior. The first challenge there was actually getting people to understand how important it is to think about the impact that you have when you come to a place like Bali, and having them understand that perhaps the alternative that we are offering actually has a positive impact. So it's really getting people to understand that maybe other sort of more standard, kind of copy-paste sort of holidays here in Bali, like do not serve the local community in most cases, have strong negative impacts on the environment here. So getting people to understand what is their footprint, not only ecological but also social when they're here. So first of all, that's the challenge, is to get people to understand what's the current situation. Perhaps what you're also alluding to is people don't understand perhaps when they get a beautiful sofa what that means actually for the planet and for the whole supply chain. I think maybe that was, and it still is, kind of our, one of our challenges. It's to share that message of how we are creating an alternative to what exists. The challenge that is associated to that is communication. It's kind of like marketing. It's branding. It's I say that's a pretty big one. Associated to that is actually, so to scale it, so on the demand side, let's say from the pilgrims, as we call it, people who participate in these trails, that's on the sort of demand side. On our side, our challenge is kind of finding people to work with, like youth. We really try to hire only Balinese youth, and it's very difficult to find young Balinese who want to walk, who want to connect with nature, who want to be out there instead of working in a cafe or as a barista. And that's definitely a challenge. Something that, yeah, that we didn't expect. Actually, we're really offering something beautiful for these young people to use their time for. But it is difficult to find people on our side to scale that. So that's on one part of our activity. The other part that we do, which is...
So if you know any young Balinese people who are looking for an outdoor experience, I think they can talk to Tanguy.
Yes, please.
Team,
we
right?
are constantly hiring.
And you talked also about marketing, right? Communications. So if there's anyone in the audience that is either interested or know people who might be interested, to please contact you, right?
Yeah, that would be great. To help us just get the message out there. Currently, I don't know, it's things like our website, like I did our website like on Wix, so it's probably not super SEO optimized. If you type, I don't know, like regenerative travel, not that probably many people type that, but like, low impact holidays in Bali or something, whatever the keywords should be, I mean, we definitely should come up on that Google search. So yeah, that part we need help on, because I mean, the more we get to do this, the more we can support local partners who are implementing these programs locally, and the more we're able to change the type of travel or tourism that this island offers. One of the really great validations that we got recently was that we teamed up with Potato Head, in Seminyak, and they're in this transition process to becoming a leader in regenerative travel. And they came up to us and said, okay, how can we do this? And we're like, okay, well, we're gonna help you guys do that. And they've teamed up with us. They've sponsored what we call regenerative farming learning centers, so hubs that we've built across the island, which are sometimes used as sleeping platforms for our participants of the trail, and the rest of the time as regenerative farming learning centers for the local communities. So it can be, for whether it's for rice or for vegetable farming or coffee or clove or different types of farming. Those places serve as like a hub. And Potato Head is getting involved in this. And for us, it was kind of a really interesting validation of like, okay, really a big name wants to support, little guy like us, and maybe they see that we're onto something. And we had discussions with them, and they shared some really interesting data that we didn't have, that we found really interesting things like, one number that really caught our attention was that 70% of people who come to Indonesia now have a preference of having a positive impact holiday during their stay. 70%. 70%, wow. If given the opportunity. So it can be, something pretty like low-hanging fruit, but I mean, still great. But like a beach cleanup, or maybe eating less, I don't know, more plant-based during while they're here. But it could also be, if it's well enough known, participating in a program that still delivers like amazing holidays, but actually explains how these holidays are having a positive impact on different levels to that location. So I think people are really looking for this. So yeah, our challenge is scaling the information, like getting that information out there, that there are options, that there is hope. That's kind of the name of our company, Astungkara. You'll hear Balinese people saying that. It's hopefully. It's just, that's what we want to do, is to give people, there is hope. We can do this. 6 years. It's like 6 years, 2 days. Jesus, that's really precise. Yes. So that's on one side, on the sort of regenerative travel side of things, our challenges for scaling. On the regenerative agriculture side, it's quite different. There, the challenges are, first of all, pretty. It's much more numerical, I would say. Like it's basically quite related to funding, which is something that we're working on right now. We're in just started the due diligence process with an impact fund to help us scale specifically this part of our organization. So getting more funding to get more team members. We're going to have the same problem finding those team members, but more team members to join us as sort of people who can work with farmers and help them sort of make the transition. So there's a financial challenge there to be able to do that, but that seems to be sort of less, like almost the lesser challenge is the financial challenge, which is interesting because I'm still quite in touch with like VCs and stuff like that in Europe, and it seems like funding is slowly drying up, at least in Europe. It seems that more and more startups are having difficulty raising funds. But when you look at the funds which are available to sort of impactful business, ecosystem restoration businesses, there's so much more offer of funding than there is demand. It's pretty nuts. The key is to have a well-designed scaling plan to speak the language of investors, which they find they have difficulty finding projects who sort of speak the same language as them. So that was really interesting to after the experience of working in a startup, and we'd done like the seed funding, Series A, Series B, sort of the typical 3 rounds of fundraising. That was very different from the current experiences of talking with impact investors. We're meeting in bamboo buildings and having super chill conversations, but the impact and the amounts are consequential as well. So there seems to be a huge amount of funding available, but the challenges are elsewhere. And I think in tech, often like the challenges is more like on the funding side, and you have your prototype or whatever that's ready to scale, and you just need to inject cash and scale it. In our case, on the agriculture side, something which is not something that we've been confronted a lot in technology, it's the sort of the human adoption of change, which is our scaling issue. We're working with farmers. The average age of farmers in Bali is 59. Worldwide is 57. So, yeah, that's also definitely a problem.
Whoever is on that age range here, what thing you might be talking about.
Yeah, well, there's also really like an important timing issue. Is who's going to produce our food in 10 years?
Absolutely.
That's something that is
Yeah, changing human behavior is never easy in any age range. I have a 5-year-old daughter that also very challenging.
Okay.
I can imagine farmers who are maybe a little bit older. But what Tanguy is touching upon is a very, very interesting topic in the sense that funding for impact and climate-related businesses has never been so much available like now, right? It's a very hot topic. We have very little time. So funding is actually not the problem. It's fairly easy to fund something if you have what it takes to fund, if you have a good solution that is impactful, if you have a proper business setup, a proper business model. So this is fairly easy to access today. The issue investors are finding is finding founders that are willing to take on the challenge, finding businesses that will actually take on the challenge, right? So happy to see that you guys are doing this. But I want to push the envelope a little bit further, which is completely understand the challenges you guys are having here in Bali. But let's imagine that Astungkara Way could perhaps scale this business model globally, or not maybe by yourselves. Maybe you say, okay, we want to stay within Bali or Indonesia or Southeast Asia, but there could be other organizations or other people meeting like this somewhere else in the world that could take on the example that you guys are setting over here and scale that up. Scale in the sense of imagine another 1,000 companies like yours doing a similar kind of work on the ground in 1,000 different locations around the globe. So how could we get that kind of scale of what you're doing? Because the impact of I have a problem with this word, regenerative agriculture. I spoke to Bruce and Haley this morning, and I had trouble saying that. I'm not a native English speaker, by the way. So regenerative agriculture has huge potential impact in the world. And if we get all farmers of the world doing this, this would be a huge plus for the planet. So what challenge do you see between where Astungkara way is today and reaching that kind of scale globally, where we have a large percentage of farmers all over the world actually doing that?
I think that we're quite blessed to start this in Bali because there are a lot of unique factors here that are very helpful. So, for example, this rice paddy restoration program that we have funds itself because we help the farmers. We actually sort of like pre-purchase the rice that they're going to produce to de-risk their transition from chemical to non-chemical. That's a really important thing, is that they don't, otherwise they will not take the risk of abandoning chemicals. And so we pre-purchase that, we've set up a little fund for that, and we then sell that rice onto hotels and restaurants. So we have people like Potato Head, like Bali Beach Glamping, Sugi Roll in Peranan. I mean, we have establishments who support this change and who are willing to pay a bit of a premium to be able to inform their customers that they're serving rice which is more healthy, which is impactful, etc. So that's sort of how we fund that part. Even though we got a grant, we don't want to be grant dependent even on that side. So first thing is, and this is pretty much standard for all regenerative agriculture projects, is that it's quite dependent on the ability to sell at a bit of a premium because in countries like Indonesia, chemical fertilizers are so heavily subsidized that conventional farmers are able to sell commodities such as rice at such low prices that they that you have to be able to sell it at a premium if you're not depending on subsidies, basically. Like all the rice which is conventionally farmed is not sold at its real price. We actually recently learned the price, the governmental budget from someone from the governor's office recently for just subsidizing nitrogen inputs in rice paddy fertilization. The number is completely nuts. It's not sustainable for them. So the government also knows that needs to transition. All this to say is that first, you need to be able to sell the rice at a bit of a premium, so you need to have a local market. What I mean is that maybe this is more difficult if you're trying to do this in some far-off place in Cambodia, for example, where you don't have hotels or resorts who are willing to pay a bit more. So we're kind of blessed to be starting this in Bali to be able to do that. And the reason for that is because there is still no established worldwide or even regional sort of labels for products which are regenerative. The word regenerative, maybe that's why it's a bit difficult, is new. It's like, hopefully it doesn't become the next greenwashing word. It's starting to be that way where everyone's doing regenerative stuff. But regenerative agriculture doesn't actually have a definition. Like, is it regenerative from an ecological point of view, from a social point of view, like below soil, above soil? What does it mean? And until that is defined, and until you have a clear a definition of what is regenerative, then people will not be willing to pay a premium for what is regenerative. So we have to have these discussions with customers to explain to them, to invite them over to our rice paddies, meet the farmers that we're working with, see for yourself. There's dragonflies and butterflies and birds flying over this rice paddy, and there is like death zone, and people are like, okay, that's regenerative, I'll pay more for it. That's kind of where we're at now. So I think that's a challenge for scaling, is to have proper certification, follow-up. We know that certification is very difficult to keep serious. Just as information, for example, rice that you buy in Bali, which is certified organic, to get organic certification, rice farmers don't need to have water testing. It's just a government agent who will come twice in a year and just ask around and make sure that there's no chemicals in the area. And then you get organic certification. Like, that's literally rice organic certification. There's no water testing. But as you know, all the rice paddies are connected to each other. So if you're cultivating rice by the beach, it's gone through all the subaks above you. That water is loaded with chemicals. but if you're not using any, that's fine, you're organic. So it doesn't mean anything. So your 50K per kilo rice at Pepito Organic, maybe think again.
Okay, we can
buy
change
rice
that
from
today.
us. It wasn't a sales pitch, but literally you can buy rice from us. But so that's a challenge for scaling. And perhaps, sorry, a last point. Our model works because, I think it works because there's a connection between agriculture and travel. The reason why we have a trail crossing the island and why we work in regenerative agriculture is that the different points on our trail are for different types of commodities. And our first learning center is in a rice paddy. So we've started working with rice farmers. That's why we have this transition program. Our second regenerative learning center is a fruit and vegetable producing area. And that's the second program that we will launch hopefully next year, probably next year. And then we will start working with those farmers. So we're starting with rice. We are becoming sort of ecosystem restoration, rice cultivation experts, but we also want to extend that expertise to other types of crops. And what I mean to say is that it works because we also bring people, we bring travelers to these places. So we provide an additional source of revenue to these farmers. Very early on, I hadn't joined the team yet, but Tim and the original Astungkara team members, met with farmers and they said, okay, what is, how can we help? What's important for you? What's on your mind? And they said three things. They said, first of all, young people are not farming. How do we get youth involved? Second, they said, our yields are declining because the soil is dying from overuse of chemicals, and chemicals are becoming more and more expensive. So how do we not get trapped? How do we continue farming in 10 years? And the third thing, they're looking around and saying, everyone's getting rich on tourism in Bali. Can we have a piece of that? And I think that's something that is happening in this case, not just Bali, also, in a lot of these other places that produce crops is, how can you, here they call it, agrowisata, how do you get some of that revenue to the farmers, and something that makes sense again for people traveling here. People want to come to Bali to connect with the real culture, with the true jewels of this island, which is its people. It's not just like doors or waterfalls or so when you're able to go out in the fields and actually have a day or multiple days with farmers and understand what they're doing, understand why they do this, why is there a temple, what is the subak, you actually get to understand Bali. And if you can connect agriculture and tourism, specifically in Bali, but this is valid in many, many other places, then you have such a virtuous cycle. And I think that's where it can be scaled up and duplicated, is for people to understand that you need to connect those two things. And that's rare. There are not many organizations out there who connect travel, tourism, however you want to call it, with agriculture, and who understand the synergies between both.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Before we jump on to questions from the floor, so guys, prepare about that. Bruce, the $1 million question, right? How can we then get lessons from the tech world, high growth lessons from the tech world, to support organizations like Astungkara Way, like Aora, to scale their operations? Are there things that we can bring onto the table that would enable sustainable practices and climate-related practices to scale up globally?
Yeah, easy question. There's many layers to that. I think one thing is to, even at the government level, encourage and embrace more legislation to just kind of twist everyone's arm. That we kind of we embrace that. We said we'd absolutely need that. It can't just be from the ground up. I think in companies, you are seeing a trend, as I sort of mentioned a little bit with Gojek and some of the other companies I've worked with, where there's an absolute expectation to become more sustainable, to become more regenerative in terms of products than degenerative. And I think that is because of rising expectations. I think customers are starting to expect more of this. Investors are starting to expect this. it needs to become more of the norm, but it is a journey. But how do you get there? How do you start from where you are now? And I'm sure there's people here of all different sizes of organizations and startups. One of the most important, I think the biggest pitfall that I've seen and have heard of is scaling prematurely. I think spending the time, and even as you do get investment, spending the time to really check your assumptions. You've had a good idea, but you really need to validate that with the intended customers, whether they're businesses or consumers or whoever they are. And I think at that stage of a startup, it's sort of a collaboration with your customer. Together, you will probably figure out what is this unique proposition that you can come up with. Very rare that someone has gone with their first idea and that's been the final idea. The successful ones have been heavily influenced by talking to people. So, and that's the role of the startup CEO, is to go out and spend a lot of time talking. And so spend the time it takes to change and to pivot what you thought your idea was. And as you think about, okay, well, we can do this in Bali, how can I do this in other areas? Just think it through. Well, maybe it's not you, but maybe what you've learned could enable other people to do the same elsewhere. You've done a lot of legwork. You've done a lot of learning. You could provide people a shortcut for this. It did remind me of another experience that I had when I used to work in a white label company, and that was enabling ISPs all over the world to understand the importance of providing security to their customers. But it was quite a hard sell internally. It's like, well, what's the benefit to us? Because we're not going to charge customers for this necessarily, or we might charge them for a certain level. And so we put together a package for the people internally in those companies. Here's all of the ammunition that you need to sell this to your board, to your leadership team, for why your company needs to do this. So it was trying to help them from all the lessons that we've had, but why it was important, what difference it made to customers, why customers then started to feel that actually they were indebted to you because you were making them and their families safe as well. You can kind of package that up and then have it scale in a much larger way in many companies. And if you're smart, you charge for that as well, because you're giving them a shortcut to do the same thing in their companies. But in terms of then, I think even when you do start to get the investment and you do start to scale, I'm going to talk a little bit more of a technology side here than on a non-technology side or non-product side. You want to build things in a way that you sort of invest in a smart way in engineering in your product. You don't want to over-engineer something. You just want to be continually improving it, understanding the customer needs, testing, is this the right thing? This comes back to the sort of lean startup sort of kind of methodology, which you have to be careful not to take too far, too late in your company's growth. But getting out there early with a solution that you've really talked to customers about, you think can work, you validate with them it really does work. But you have to understand eventually you will have to improve and build this in a much more scalable way. So one of the biggest mistakes companies make is that they just are very scrappy, and they keep being scrappy for years, and all of a sudden have this enormous technical debt. And they realize, okay, now that we're ready to scale, now that we're ready to pump in the marketing dollars and really grow, we can't because our platform is so unstable and we haven't invested in the technology and all the things that we need. Now we need to ask for permission to slow down for a year so that we can speed up. And that's a very, very hard sell. So having this more sort of thoughtful idea of every year you're going to have to try and make this thing better. You will have to replace things and improve things, but don't forget about that. You're going to have to grow it so that it can scale, it can work in multiple locations, it could work with a partner, just to try and think about, don't forget in the future you'll have to scale, but don't try and do it too soon. At the end of the day, you're going to have a sustainable business that has, you don't want to spend an enormous amount of marketing before you've actually figured out, is this exactly the right product? So I think it's to force yourself to go a little bit slower than perhaps you want to initially to get all of that learning. The other thing is then, when you do start to get bigger and you go, say, multiple regions in Indonesia, maybe other countries, is, how do you go global and still be local? And I think that's where you need to do the groundwork again, is not assume that something that worked in one country will work in another. So you have to do the legwork, you have to go there, and you have to test your assumptions all over again. And you will find there are nuances. And so you can have things that are universal truths, things that work everywhere, that might, let's say hotels might work in every hotel to some degree in the world, but there are going to be local nuances, local regulations, local things that you need to understand to be credible to them, to help them, and eventually, of course, to have people on the ground in that country. I think the other thing is, I'm going to forget what I was, my train of thought here. But yeah, there's all different ways of scaling, but yeah, number one is don't try and scale too quickly. And be careful how you spend that investment. Oh, and the other thing is, I think that to your point, there absolutely is investment money out there. I was speaking to a friend of mine this morning who's leading a startup for electric vehicles, and he's saying that it's absolutely there. It is absolutely there. So it's very timely to start having these discussions. So.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. Yes, the money is out there. There's a bunch of stats to show that. Fiona is here that is going to talk a little bit about that afterwards, I hope. If not, I will ask you to do that. And yeah, totally agree. One of the key lessons is really to start small, test, figure out what customers want. A little bit of what Tanguy was talking about, right? The Astungkara way is pretty much what you've been saying. Testing the local market, making sure that it works here, and yeah, have a concrete business model that works and potentially try to scale that up. So thank you. Appreciate it. Now, the last question before we turn to the audience, going back to Diego. So what can we do to help decarbonize the textile and furniture industry apart from pressuring the suppliers or retailers whom we're buying from?
I think we all go back to the same point. We are also connected today here, talking about the same point. By the way, Tanguy, my industry is way more less sensitive than yours. We carry less sensitivity in the textile and the furniture industry. I don't know, we deal with factories and everything. It's like super hard to really get to inside to these companies to have a different approach to speak to them. It's just such a different challenge. But I will speak as a consumer. How we can create sort of way to support the decarbonization of the textile and furniture industry. Number one is just start from yourself. When you're going to go to your house and you really think that you need to buy something, just make sure if you really need that. If you really want to buy something, sometimes we put price and quantity above quality. Try to do the other way. Try to put quality first, because that will give you the lead to have a more sustainable product and long-lasting product in your house. I will say that if we all embrace the circular economy principles, that the way we behave every day, the actions that we take, we all need to keep, we just keep account our actions. I had a really amazing conversation yesterday with Ben, and I would like to continue today about education, how we can actually indeed create sort of way to get faster to people's mind to understand that this is the way we should go, and this is the way we can create less impact in our environment. So we all are conscious here. So let's start from ourselves first. Later we move to our purchasing behavior. I think we will all love shopping, but that shopping should be more conscious now, especially in our homes. So that's the invitation that I bring here. The products are there. Just make sure that when you check the brand, is that the brand is speaking from the real products that they are making. Just a quick summary here how we are doing it. When we come to a furniture manufacturer, we come with the approach that, okay, we have the recycled textile here. So they understand that to go to the market more sustainable, they need to look for other alternatives in suppliers. For example, foam, glue, wood. So we kind of kick off this idea in their company to, okay, now we got the recycled fabric, who is the next supplier that we're going to get in recycled composition? So now there are more companies now who used to do virgin foam, like with virgin materials, now they are start producing recycled foam, recycled acron, more sustainable glue. The wood now is coming certified. So all these, even internal practices, they are trying to change all these machines who are working with they consume a lot of energy. They're using a lot of alternatives right now, like solar panels, like electric vehicles. So all these, they are trying to enter to the more sustainable environment. And I think if we look at the product, the product will need to start speaking about what is in there. And yeah, buy from Aora. If you need a cushion or sofa.
Thank you. Thanks, Diego. So yeah, the power is on our hands, right? As consumers, making pressure. The industry is already aware, and some people have already started that transition. But I think we all need to pressure a lot. That's the biggest power in our hands. So I'd like to provide the mic to the audience. Is there any question you guys would like to ask to anyone? Jonathan here. So Guzman, could you please hand over the mic to Jonathan? If you could say who the question is to, then I can provide the mic as well.
Yeah, it's probably a question for everybody, but I would say, Bruce, maybe you could kick the answer off. So I'm come from a startup background as well. And like one of the things we're always facing, right, is moving from early adopters into very different behavior patterns with later adopters. And I think that a lot of climate solutions are currently stuck in the early adopter range. And so I also think about us as in a storytelling business in tech and a behavior modification business in tech. And I'm really curious about how you think we could leverage things like storytelling and behavior modification loops to help some, real world solutions sort of make that leap from early adopters into the broader market.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a common problem. Your initial customers are not going to be maybe the majority of your final customers. In the case of some of the products I've worked on, they've been very geeky, very specialist and passionate about their particular technology that they're interested in. Which was great because it made the products technically excellent because they were very demanding and you had to talk to them and have credibility with that audience. And this was true, and I'll go back to security for a second. I used to work for a company called AVG, which was free security, a new business model. It was very effective. It was also one of the best security products out there that was free. But it was very, very geeky, and it appealed to very geeky customers. And I'm sure they don't mind me calling them geeky. I'm geeky. Customers around the world. But then we're like, okay, we're hitting a plateau. How do we move to the mainstream? Because security is not the most interesting thing. And that was a case of going back and learning who your potential customers are or could be, and what were their views of the security that was out there at the time. It was, it was Norton security. It was, it's kind of like boring but necessary. What do you do? But through the right kind of research, and you can over-research as well, but through the right kind of research and just going into people's home and understanding, well, what does this mean to you? What are you using today? Do you care? You actually we got to the point of understanding, what are they really worried about? Well, they actually were worried, but it wasn't about viruses. It was about privacy. It was about their kids' safety. It was about kids wandering off. It was about people grooming kids online. Those were the things that kept them awake at night. It's like, okay, so what we should have is, we'll protect you from viruses as a baseline. Yes, of course, and completely redesign the experience to make people feel, number one, you are safe. We've done the basics. Don't worry about that. But here's a whole bunch of advice about how you can navigate the Facebook and the Google and the Twitter and all these things in the world that you're worried about by giving you a scale between completely private, don't talk to anybody, to completely open, everybody knows everything about you, but to help you navigate all their settings and how you can change that. But then also empowering designers. I learned early in my career to not just tell designers what to do, tell them what emotions you want to get at the end of the day, letting them go a little crazy. And they came back with a very different, much more consumer-looking experience about, am I safe, am I private, and what are the other things they're worrying about? How do I do things to make sure my battery doesn't run out when I most need it? And what are things I can do to protect my kids? Very different experience, with a bit of a toggle for the geeks still. If you want to get into all the settings, you still can. But if you don't care about that stuff, here's a very nice solution. And then there's a lot of doubt about this, like, well, don't change the main product, because this product is so finely honed, it makes us lots of money. Don't go changing it so radically. So we launched something in parallel called Zen, and offered this. We spent a lot of time in beta, but then finally offered it as a product that you could buy. And also showed it to Sony at the Mobile World Congress. And Sony went, this is fantastic. We've been looking for something like this to make it more interesting, and did a huge deal so just by you could still buy the very technical product if you wanted it, but you had this much more family-oriented, different type of customer altogether that still benefited from all the investment you previously made, but it was just a very different story. So I think expect your customers to change, expect the marketing that you've used, the way that you basically are talking to early adopters and getting them to convince each other this is what they need. Very different, of course. I don't have a exact answer, but it's that realization your customers are going to change and to expect it. So.
Anyone else want to contribute? Jen, you want to say something? No? Okay. Let me just say something about this as well. I think it's an interesting question, and I think this is probably the major reason why we are where we are now climate-wise, and in both negative and positive ways, right? So we've known, the science has been showing us for 40 years that if we continue to pump carbon into the atmosphere, we're going to run into trouble. And there was a lot of storytelling behind avoiding that or discrediting that story, right, over the last 40 years. And this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest reasons why we are where we are today. At the same time, if we look into public opinion in the US, Europe, and Australia over the past decade in terms of climate change, it has evolved dramatically thanks to a lot of storytelling, Greta being one of them, right? They caught a lot of attention, and et cetera, and then the science and blah, blah, blah. So education is a big part of it. And I think this is something that we all here need to do. If we are concerned about nature and climate change, we all need to do a better job at storytelling, right? I definitely need to, and I'm working on that. How can we get the word out there to get more people to become aware that the problem is real and about the solutions that we should be working on? One great solution for me that deserves a much, much better storytelling, or not better, but to explode in terms of storytelling, is what Ben yesterday was talking about at the meetup, right? What are the root causes of climate change, which is coming from our internal behaviors, and actually not just from the behaviors, but from our fears from the past, right? So if we can get that story to the hands and the heads of many more people, so people can understand this in a better way, I think we have a better go. So this connecting to what Jen was talking about earlier on as the every job is a climate job. If you are a storyteller, if you're a marketeer, if you're a designer, especially, that is dealing with emotions, this is the best story you can tell in the world, right? You can help to get this story out there so that we get more people to realize where the problem is coming from, but where the solutions also are, and start taking action. So thanks for your question. I hope this makes sense. Yeah? Sorry.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Sorry, my name's Adrian. I'm just wondering, with where we are at versus where we need to be to meet these climate and environmental goals, talk about plastic repurposing, carbon neutrality, carbon offsetting. Those seem very much like we're tinkering when actually we need a hard reset, right? So if I borrow terminology from the startup world, and it's great to see people from tech startups going into government, like I think Gojek founder going to Indonesian government, and then also going to the impact space. I think we can learn from the startup world, things like doing a hard reset. I think we're at a stage where we don't need to tinker, we actually need to pivot. And we've seen with the COVID pandemic that we can do things on a global level. We've come through that with whole cities being shut down, freedoms taken away, social interaction taken away, and we've come through, we've survived. So I'm wondering if we need a similar reset for the environment. And this might sound sci-fi crazy, but everyone needs to bootstrap. Remove all the distractions and all the bad choices that are out there. And then we can support impact projects by only making those choices available and finding product market fit. Like, if we take away all the unnecessary excesses, which of these remaining choices is getting engagement? And those ones get funded and get promoted for scaling. I think we're at that stage. And if that is too extreme, then I'll offer something a bit more optimistic. A Harvard study found that in order for massive social change to happen, you only need a percentage of the population, which I found very surprising. It wasn't, 1 in every 10. It was only 3.5%. All right. So if we just get 3.5% of the population engaged on some really massive goals, I think then we can really accelerate where we need to be. Sorry for that rant, and if I get thrown out, I understand why.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Is that an explanation or a question?
There's more an invitation to comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could not agree with you more. Yeah. And I think the reason why we have this discussion today, the meetup, scale climate action, is really how can we get 3.5% of the population, or 1 billion people, or whatever number we need to actually be actively working on that, right? Understanding that every job is a climate job. How can we bootstrap things and do things very differently from how they have been doing? How can we get the same kind of startup tech businesses that have boomed over the last 2 decades to be replicated in the climate space or in the sustainability space, right? I think that's the question that we should be asking ourselves and should be working towards that, right? And I hope the discussion today inspires people to be asking those questions and trying to figure out where they can actually fit in that picture. And I agree with you 100%. Anyone else would like to take a go?
I'm actually running the numbers to think what 3.5% of the population will be in the textile industry, so we can provide that support. Because I agree deeply for myself. I agree with you. I think the reset is needed. I think this is my feeling. It's that after pandemic we become more greedy. I don't know why. That's for my understanding. I feel we care more about money than actually having solutions that really create more sustainability in certain industries. So it's a feeling that I've been trying to understand. Why every time I visit the customer, I feel that they just care about the money. They don't really care about what the product is going to help them to become. And then also, we used to think in business in long term, or at least from my experience when I was living in China, we always saw things in the long term, how we can benefit this in the long term. But I don't see that anymore. I think also become a shorter time. So like if you look at this, when I explain a customer how we can see this in the long term becoming the most sustainable option for them, and also profitability, like they can make more money with this. It takes more time for them to understand, but we are talking about the same concept, it's money. So it's just something, but just to summarize, is the reset will be something that we might need.
Hopefully we don't need widespread destruction before that happens, right?
No, just a quick thought. No, we do need a tipping point. I hope it's not the top 3.5%. Are the people who care and have the money to be able to pay for these more expensive products. I think the idea of more circular economies, a lot of companies are coming back to. How can we take old versions of these products and resell them or recycle them to again have regenerative products? I think it's starting to take off, but it just has to be affordable for the ordinary person. This is a thing I always struggle with in every role. I don't want to do it if it's just for the top 3.5%. It has to be for everybody. And I think, unfortunately, what often causes tipping points is, listening to the news today where old people in Italy can't go outside because it's too hot. So they're going all through this pandemic experience all over again, and they're appealing to people to look out for your elderly neighbours, go do their groceries. It's like, well, this is like a lockdown all over again because it's too hot to go outside. So I think the fear of this happening, maybe there's an element of fear there that's needed, but I think it's companies who lead by example, who just do it. But even the case of Gojek, we trying to find affordable solutions. We could make food packaging from seaweed, but it's too expensive right now. So you need to invest in the technology to bring those costs down. So eventually it will get there. but I think it's a case of how do you ensure that it is not just passed on to the consumer? How does it benefit everybody? And this is where it comes, I think, back to legislation, and it just becomes you have to do this and this and this in order to be more sustainable by this period. I mean, I know in the US and Europe, when you do have companies publish their annual report on sustainability, they're actually going to be held to those numbers. And that's a trend which I think is really good. Hold people, don't just make it about greenwashing. Don't just make it, we're doing this. It's like, well, okay, you've now committed to do that, you better do it. So I think there's multiple levels to this. But it's also a little bit like voting. People often don't vote. They say, well, my vote doesn't make a difference. It does. So every little thing helps, but it also helps to reimagine your job. Like, my job can actually be more about this than it's ever been before. It's about influencing your companies, and it's about voting with your money as well, what you buy and what you don't buy. But I still worry about the ordinary person, how we're going to help them. So I don't have an answer to that, but that worries me.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, one more question before we move on. And what I know quite a few people want to ask questions, and then let's do this afterwards because we have quite a few things to cover and we've just run too long, maybe. Sorry about that. I really apologize. But you guys are very welcome to come up to all the speakers during the network session and ask your questions, okay? I promise to help with that. You have the mic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes, we can.
My name is Rudy Van Dree. I'm a 59-year-old engineer and hydrologist, and I've been working in the sustainability space for a couple of decades. One of my first projects that was a nature-based solutions was back in 1992. So I've got a question about the regenerative project, and I've got a few other comments as well. So one of my observations or comments about how we got here is the propaganda of climate change and global warming and sea level rise. For me, though, working in that space as a hydrologist, they've all been very cleverly designed labels to confuse people. The real driver of all of this is actually atmospheric energising. So it's simply, as a hydrologist, that's what I study. And what's happening to our weather is there's more energy in our weather system. Now, the reasons behind that are many, but one of the biggest reasons is, of course, the human footprint and how the human footprint has allowed more energy to reflect off the planet. So, for example, removing trees and putting in a park, that reflects more energy. Removing that park and putting in a concrete road that reflects more energy. So, that goes on in infinitum. So, I get really annoyed when people use the word sustainability, because growth is not sustainable. So we can't talk about sustainability. You're dreaming, okay? We can minimise impact, that's it. Unless we control growth, there is no sustainability, full stop. And even, the UNESCO has changed its definition of what was ESD back in 2002. If you look through the history of ESD, which was Environmental Sustainable Development, doesn't exist anymore. It's now education about sustainable development. So my question really goes to, as I've been involved in these projects in the past, how, and you've mentioned that part of your project was based on some funding source, how has your funder required you to report progress? So in terms of regenerative practices and particularly the impact on the soil biota. So, as a lot of people might observe when you walk through the rice paddies throughout Bali, if you look closely, that sloppy mud is pretty inert crap. There's not much life left in it. The projects that I've been involved in, we've got very close relationships with universities to measure soil biota and provide real outcomes in terms of being able to report increases in soil biota. So I'm just wondering what sort of measures and reporting requirements you have, and what do you do internally for yourself to remind yourself that you're making progress?
Sure. Get into a bit of the details on how the program works. Maybe also talk a bit about the funder itself. The funder is an organization called Zero Footprint, in this case Zero Footprint Asia. So they're an organization that teams up with hotels and restaurants, and they will add like 1% to the bill that people pay. So they collect those 1%, so it's actually like customer paid. They collect all that money in different, like a lot in North America, in this case in Asia, and they use that money that is collected to fund regenerative agriculture projects around the world. Like super nice model. So the program that they're funding for us it lasts 1 year, and it's sort of divided into 2 blocks, and the first block is what could be called like capacity building or like education for ourselves and for farmers. We are not experts, so we're working with experts who are sort of teaching us and the farmers at the same time. And the second block is a block of monitoring and evaluation. So that's the measuring part. So to answer your question specifically, there are a number of metrics that they're asking to report on. The first one is the number of farmers, of course, who join the program. The second is the surface area that is involved in this program. And we're actually just now, we're a few weeks from moving to the second pillar of this program, which is